or maybe after the event. They'll come up to me and say, I'm a brand new manager. I'm a brand new middle manager. I'm a new leader. Can I really affect the company culture? And I tell them they absolutely can. And I will give them some ideas, depending on what their business is. There are some things they can immediately go back and do. But then there are others, it might take time, but they will absolutely affect the culture versus just showing up, punching the time clock, thinking that they don't really make any big decisions because, there might be so many levels above them. But I do believe that a single person with a great idea can start a revolution.
Hi and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Anushka at peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 400,000 visitors a year, and we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month. A training and development veteran for more than 30 years, Jim Knight facilitates a variety of interactive topics such as organizational culture, service, building efficient teams, employee branding, and engagement and performance management. Jim was recognized by Training Magazine as representing one of the top 125 training companies in the world. And out of all the industries and businesses that he's really been featured, in Forbes Magazine, Inc. Magazine, Fast Company, Entrepreneur Magazine, and Fox Small Business News. Currently, he's the owner of Knight Speaker, which positions him to facilitate virtual webinars or keynote speeches for any association or company event. In 2016, he was listed in the top 20 of all booked and rated speakers in the US by the speaker experts. He's also the best-selling author of Culture That Rocks, How to Revolutionize Your Company's Culture, a how-to business book designed to amp up a brand in any industry. Along with his business partner, Brant Menswer, Jim co-hosts a free weekly leadership podcast called Thoughts That Rock. What's remarkable is that a portion of Jim's book, podcast, training, and speaking program proceeds all go to the No Kid Hungry to eliminate childhood hunger in the US and Cannonball Kids Cancer, which funds innovative, accessible research for children fighting cancer with better treatments, quality of life, and options. We are so happy and honored to have someone of his stature today on our interview series. Welcome, Jim. We're thrilled to have you.
Well, thank you so much. I didn't know that you would go through all of that. I'm so honored to really be with the peopleHum gang. And honestly, this is a great honor for me as well. So thank you for having me spend some time with you.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute honor for me, and the pleasure is absolutely ours. So Jim, diving right deep in, can you tell us a little bit about how Knight Speaker, a company that's really been running successfully for close to 30 years now, came to be?
Yeah, I really came out of some different industries. So I started off being a music major. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be a professional singer. So I went to college. I went to university to get my degree to do that. And when I was there, I discovered that to make a living, to make some money, you actually had to be good. So I changed careers. I became a school teacher, a middle school teacher. So I loved being in education. I did that for 6 years. And then I just sort of stumbled into hospitality. Although my very first job was at an alligator farm, which we have here in the States. It's called Gatorland Zoo. I love that job, but I worked then for an Italian restaurant called Olive Garden. And then I took a summer job at Hard Rock Cafe. And Hard Rock is really where I spent a big chunk of my time in hospitality. But when you ask about Knight Speaker, I really use the music, the education, and the hospitality. I pull all three of those levers so that I can go out and have really fun. I call it edutaining. So a little bit of, education and some entertainment. You want it to be edutaining from a delivery, from a speaker and a content standpoint. So I have been doing it on the side for about 25, 30 years, but I really did have some actual real jobs at one time. Now I get a chance to go do what I'm doing now. And hopefully impact and influence people all over the world. So it's an absolute joy for me, but I'm now self-employed. I'm an entrepreneur, and this is what I get a chance to do. But I did love all of the time that I spent in all of those industries, whether it was music, education, or hospitality. But I like them all.
That's great. That's so heartening to hear that you've had significant experience over a plethora of fields, and that's lovely how you spoke about edutainment, and that's
Yes.
a really fresh perspective, right?
You can use that one if you want. That's a freebie.
Oh, we'd like that, sure. And congratulations on the success of Night Speakers. It's
Thank
great.
you.
It's phenomenal.
Thank you. I was very lucky. I think my glory year so far, 2016, I did about 100 speaking engagements. But on average, if you know speakers that do this professionally, I'm around 35 to 40 engagements a year. So, I consider that very successful. As you know, with some of the pandemic, it's tamped that down a little bit, but we're doing more of these things like a Zoom call, a webinar. I do a lot of virtual keynotes, but I really appreciate you saying that. My success with Night Speaker has been phenomenal. And if it works out okay, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life.
That's great. That's great. It's amazing to see you're actually following your passion. And yes, that's great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So coming to the second question, Jim, you've mentioned that you started your career journey at Gatorland Zoo, next into public education as a school teacher,
Yeah.
and then into hospitality. That's Hard Rock. So,
Yes.
and finally, you shifted gears a little and went into learning and development topics. So how did this interest really get cultivated?
Yeah, I think it probably started maybe after Gatorland Zoo. So when you get past that, but when I was at the Italian restaurant at Olive Garden, I became a trainer. And so although I was doing my day-to-day functions, somebody wanted me, just because I would guess my knowledge, my experience, to train other people. And it was just a frontline position, but I loved it. But it got to the point that maybe 5 of my shifts during the week, I bet you 3 of those were training shifts. So that's where I think a lot of the teaching started in my head. Then when I went on to public education, obviously as a middle school teacher. So middle school depends on where you are in the world. These are kids that are between the age of, I would say 11 and 14 years old. So they're teenagers. And I love teaching. And that was great for me because it fed the beast in me, fed the soul of wanting to help other people. But then really when I got to Hard Rock is where it started. So I was at Hard Rock International for 21 years. As you said in the introduction, I ran all of their learning and development initiatives. I've opened up properties around the world, many of those in Asia. And I really just fell in love with teaching other people. Now at Hard Rock, it was on a grander scale. You might have a cafe that would have 150 people, but also a hotel or a casino that might employ 3,000 people. So it again started to accelerate it more, starting with that trainer, then being in charge of training and development. But ultimately, I think my mind was, I think that I could go do this for a living, maybe not just focus on hospitality, which is food, beverage, a little bit of retail, but I could go vertical. And the majority of the jobs that I now get a chance to do and have been doing for the last 10 years are outside of the industry. I do a lot in banking and insurance and funeral directors and senior assisted living and auto mechanics. You name it, there are groups of people, whether it's an individual company or an association, they get together and talk about the exact same things that we do. So I think that the long answer to your question is, I found that people that need help with their culture, their service, their employee engagement, their leadership, it's no different in any other industry. They're trying to figure out what works for them. And so for me to have a little bit of that background in hospitality, it allows me to bring the thunder and bring something differentiated than hopefully what they're used to. Plus they get some of this, you bring the spiky hair and the blue jeans and the rock and roll, and hopefully again, it makes it a little bit more edutaining, like we said.
Absolutely. And I think this is a really unique version and a unique perspective. Not many influencers, even on our talk show, have brought that. So
Oh,
that's
really?
great, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah,
I love that. That's great. I'm different. I'll take it.
absolutely. So also, you're a culture expert, Jim. So, what do you really think the term culture is today? And do you think, like, with the pandemic, it's highly misinterpreted?
It is misinterpreted. I think maybe 20, 30 years ago, it was such a nebulous, esoteric, fuzzy word. When I say culture, I don't know what comes to your mind, but people have different ideas as to what it is. And that's the first problem. And I actually thought if I was going to go talk about this or write a book about this, I really needed to define what it is. So this is how I look at it. I'm going to tell you what I think it's not. I don't think it is heritage, which is what I think a lot of people confuse culture with. I think they think it's about the past, the way it's always been done. When people close their eyes, they remember the good old days. Like they remember that heritage, the story that came before. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love companies and brands that have a great story, but it's definitely not the same thing as culture. Culture for me is all about the present. It's the here and now. And the only reason I can say that is because I think culture at its very core is just a collection of people. That's it. I don't think it's the logo or the font or the color palette or the building or the product or whatever. You can bring all those things to the table. But when I look at the humans that are actually making up the culture, and this could be a physical building, it could be online, it could be on the phone, doesn't matter to me. I believe that it's a collection of individual behaviors. Each of those behaviors, by the way, are either awesome or they're not that great. But whoever's in the company at that time, that is the culture. And so every single time somebody leaves or joins the culture, it changes immediately. Every time they leave the company or come on board, the culture changes immediately. So this is the example that I use all the time. And I appreciate the question because this is so confusing to so many people. I will have somebody run up to me and go, "Oh, my culture is not the way that it used to be." Yes, no duh. You know why? Because people have been coming and going. And I use the example like this. Let's say that I love your forms, your tools, your processes, your job description, your manuals, the building, the widgets we sell, all of that stuff. But I don't like you. I don't like the employees. I don't like the boss. Boom. I kick everybody out. But all the stuff I keep in place, have I affected the culture? A lot. I have to start all over from scratch versus the exact opposite. Let's say I keep all of that stuff is now gone. I'm going to revolutionize everything, but I get to keep all the humans. I really haven't changed the culture that much. So again, another long answer, but I think if you surround yourself with the right people, if you have the right humans, which by the way, everything is predicated on human behavior. We learn everything. It's the difference between us and the rest of the animal kingdom. You learn everything from your parents, from school, from your friends, from religion, from lack of religion, from the playground, whatever it is. By the time you come to me as some 19-year-old kid wanting a job, if your natural disposition isn't to smile or have a personality or want to be around other people, that's going to be a problem for me. And I used to think I was a good trainer. I can't train people to smile. I can't. I've tried. I can't give you a personality. You either have it or you don't. So my long answer is I love heritage. I love the story. I love the past. That's what attracts me to companies, but it's not enough. The culture is about the people working in the business at that moment. And as soon as somebody leaves or as soon as somebody comes on board, the culture has been shifted a little bit. So the goal is surround yourself with an army of giants who actually get it. That'll help you perpetuate the brand for all time. That's what culture is to me.
That's great. That was such an enlightening, elaborate response. And I thoroughly agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. It's people who are at the core of organizational
Always.
culture. Absolutely. And
Always. I love it.
yes, and I think we really need the human connect and more interpersonal interaction to actually foster a healthy organizational culture in the long run, a
Yeah,
sustainable one.
it is. And so the second part of your question was around the pandemic, which is also really tough because particularly in my country right now, people are shut down, they're locked down. A lot of them might be working from home. So everybody's had to shift, obviously, to a virtual environment. So in my particular job, it's a little bit different because, you know, I can up my webinar game. I can look at the lights and the camera and the microphone, but a lot of people are not going to have those tools, but they're still trying to think, how can I stay connected to the culture? And if I'm a boss, how do I get my people to stay engaged 5 months, 6 months, 8 months while they're still at home? So there are definitely a lot of things that I've been doing lately and a lot of webinars to help organizations still create and amp up or amplify or even revolutionize their company culture from a distance. They might not be able to do it until they get back in person. But, you know, I think this is, even though the pandemic is here, I think even with the vaccines that are about to be here, I do believe we're going to live in a hybrid world for a while. I think there's going to be some virtual mix in with the in-person as well. So culture from a distance is going to be pretty critical for a lot of companies.
Absolutely, absolutely. I also feel a lot of HR softwares are focusing their attention on remote workforce management tools.
Yes.
So there can be like a flexible workforce.
Absolutely.
So, Jim, coming to the next question, how do you just get employees to be on the very same page as you are, and how does that really contribute towards organizational productivity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, maybe a little bit different in the pandemic world, right? But I believe that if you believe in my definition that the culture is about a collection of people, well, then you got to get everybody to be, like you said, they're all on the same sheet of music, right? They're all going in the same direction. And only because I study brands, I read so much about the companies that I like to talk about or write about. I know that the most successful companies in the world have a shared mindset. And I think a lot of people will think, oh, it's their product. They were first to the market. There's no competitors, whatever. I don't think it's any of that stuff. Maybe at the beginning. But then when you start to have competitors, the thing that I have noticed that they do better than everybody else, they communicate. These companies are on the hunt to communicate, to make sure all of their employees are on that same sheet of paper. So they might have more pieces of paper, more memos, like in the break room where an associate will hang out. They might have more video, more e-learning, more distance-based technology that they can use. Maybe they're allowed to text their employees with their smartphone. Maybe it's good old-fashioned conversations. Like they might have more meetings, more all-staff groupings, more workshops, more one-on-one conversations. Not because my boss from human resources told me to do it, to fill out the form, to go in the file, to get more money. Like I'm not talking about a performance appraisal or review. I'm talking about just having good old-fashioned conversations. And I love the fact that an employee knows exactly what they're doing. They are absolutely crystal clear as to what they're supposed to be working on because my boss talks to me all the time. So I think these companies that go out of their way to communicate as much as they possibly can, I don't think you can ever over communicate. I think they're going to be in a good place because if you don't do it, here's what happens, right? People start coming up with their own ideas. If I don't give you any leadership, any direction, if I don't tell you, let's say, what our customer service program or philosophy is, you know what you're going to do, right? You're going to guess. You're going to guess and you're going to do the best you can. And if you're a rock star, if you're a really good employee, maybe you're going to do it this direction and maybe it's awesome. But if the company wanted you to do it in this direction, now we're all over the place and we create confusion for everybody else. So the goal is you get everybody going in the same direction. You will produce Herculean world-beating results. You are definitely more likely to get whatever the metric is. You pick any measurement that you want. You're more likely to get it there when, you can turn around and you got an army of giants coming with you versus you trying to roll up your sleeve and do it on your own. So the long answer to your question is there's a lot of things you can do. And I don't know if I'm pro or con, for or against paper or technology or one-on-one. I think you figure it out. But my answer is probably yes. Yes. I think you do it all so that I'm crystal clear. That's true north. That's the direction we all need to be going.
Absolutely. And I think communication really helps bring clarity to leaders in their business endeavors. Absolutely.
Yes.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I also believe that earlier in the brick and mortar work settings, we used to have water cooler conversations and non-work banter. But I think with the pandemic has really forced people to willingly strike a connect with their employees, to
Yeah.
have extra work fun sessions just because of the distance. So it's earlier it used to happen not in a willing way, but yeah, now it's more it's like an activity based thing. So that's great. Yes.
It is. Well, and I think one of the things that I mentioned earlier is you're helping supervisors, bosses, entrepreneurs, franchisees, if they've got multiple people working all over the place, whether they were always distance based or maybe, like you said, they were brick and mortar and now they're having to work from home. Things like this, doing a Zoom call, that takes the place a little bit of a water cooler conversation. It might be a little bit directed with the boss and keeping everybody together. But I've seen a lot of companies, they've started their own discussions. They have their own water cooler conversations to at least take the place of those discussions that you used to have inside of the four walls. So I think technology, it's brilliant. I'm sure some people are probably over it, they're ready to get back to the day-to-day, the normal life, but I don't think this is ever going away. I think this, if anything else, has been an accelerant to help keep people connected now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, also, Jim, you've written a book on a culture that rocks, how to revolutionize your company's culture. Would you like to give our audience, would you like to talk about that to our audience?
Yeah, I've got a copy right here. It's called Culture That Rocks. I think you said it best at the very beginning. It's a how-to business book. So again, sort of like I was talking about earlier, I didn't want people to be confused about company culture. I never really say I'm an expert. I just think I have a lot of experience and maybe some expertise in a few areas. But I did work for one of the greatest cultures in the history of cultures. The Hard Rock brand is a phenomenal company to work for. So it certainly, they immersed me in the spirit of rock and roll. They at least got my mind working so that when I finally jumped off of it and retired from corporate life, I thought, I need to have a book out there that I can put into people's hands so I can explain it to them. But it is fun. It does have a lot of references about rock and roll and a little bit about my life and some hard rock stuff. But it is no doubt a very specific how-to business book. So when people read it, they're going to get a lot of meaty takeaways every single chapter. And I wrote it in such a way that almost every chapter is very specific. I talk about leadership, customer service, employee engagement. So much employee engagement, I run the gambit of the entire employee life cycle. I'll talk about how to interview, recruit, hire, train, develop, communicate, reward, recognize, even how you terminate people. Like there are processes in place that you can do, but you can do them in such a phenomenal way. So I go through that. I talk about technology. I will talk about social media. I talk about philanthropy, which is also a really cool way to, I think, revolutionize or amp up your culture. So the book has a lot of information in it. It's a pretty dense book. I actually do have also a narrated audio USB. So this is the version that you can plug right into either your smartphone or download it onto a CD if you're still doing CDs, or on your laptop or whatever. But some people want to listen to it, especially if they've got a long commute into work. They'd rather do the audio book than the physical book. And I have a Kindle version as well. But, honestly, the reason that I wrote it was just to have something that I could put into people's hands to help them clarify what culture is. And if they were at all in any type of a management position, it's for them, because it gives them a lot of ideas as to how they can immediately go back and maybe kick up, just a couple notches their culture to make it better.
Wow, that was great. I would love to read that book, honestly. And I genuinely feel, I genuinely feel it's such a holistic book that leaders of tomorrow really ought to read. And it's just great. Congratulations on the success of
Thank
your
you.
book.
Thank you so much. I've had it out for about 8 years, and I'm currently now deconstructing the book. So I'm going to write 3 smaller black and white versions, very thin, on the main topics: leadership, service, and engagement. So starting next year, each one of those will come out. If you put them together, it'll still be the Culture That Rocks book. It'll be an amped up 2.0 version, but I've been very lucky and successful with this one, and it just helps out with my podcast or my speaking or whatever else I wind up getting into. So thank you so much for saying that.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. And it's great how the book has a proper blend of work and business as well as rock and roll. So
Yes, of course.
That's great.
Edutainment, like I said, right? Edutainment.
Absolutely. So to kind of wrap this interview up, Jim, do you have any last sound bites you'd like to leave our audience with?
You know, I will say that out of all the stuff that I get a chance to do, I probably get hired more for culture than anything else. And sometimes I will have somebody in the audience either ask me, or maybe after the event, they'll come up to me and say, I'm a brand new manager. I'm a brand new middle manager. I'm a new leader. Can I really affect the company culture? And I tell them they absolutely can. And I will give them some ideas depending on what their business is. There are some things they can immediately go back and do, but then there are others, it might take time, but they will absolutely affect the culture versus just showing up, punching the time clock, you know, thinking that they don't really make any big decisions because, you know, there might be so many levels above them. But I do believe that a single person with a great idea can start a revolution. That's how companies are changed. That's how philanthropic movements are started. That's how countries are overthrown. Single people with great ideas can start a revolution. So if you think about it from a micro standpoint, I think somebody that reads the book or listens to the session or just thinks a little bit about what can I do differently to amp up my culture, there's probably a lot of things they can do. They're just not thinking about it strategically or, like you said, holistically. I love when that happens. I love helping out new managers like that. So that would be my main phrase. That's probably the most influential that's led me down the path of where I lead my life. Single person, great idea, can start a revolution.
Great, love it. Couldn't second you more on that. It reminds me of Gandhi's quote, you need to be the change you want to see. So absolutely. And I generally feel each one of us, like all our individual contributions in a micro level can have a macro level impact on a company-wide level. So yeah.
I agree. Thank you. Hey, you put me in the same sentence as Gandhi. I'll take it.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Jim. It was such an honor to interview today. Thank you so much for taking out the time to share all your views with us. I genuinely learned so much in this half-an-hour interview, and I'm sure our audience are going to totally benefit from this as well.
Well, I appreciate it. And I've been looking forward to do something with peopleHum for a while. So I appreciate you having me on the series. Rock on, everybody. Rock on.